So here we are live, and over the next couple of minutes, we'll have people coming in. Sometimes people will miss the very, very beginning of what we do because they're all trying to cram themselves in through the electronic doorway and find a seat. And there's no assigned seating. Just take whatever seat you find. There is I've actually not been on the side of the screen of being a person attending, but I have something on my side called Q&A. It may also be called chat or something else on your end, but I see something called Q&A. That is for the audience, for the people who've come. If anytime along the way while we're talking, if you have a question that you would like to ask, go ahead and type it in there. I don't necessarily read all the questions, but we do get some good questions from time to time. A lot of times I will also include your first name if it's there on the question. And
we'll do our best to check them from time to time.
Yeah, and you can ask them at any time, but it doesn't mean I'll check it right away. So I'm Andrew Weaver. I've been in the gamma world about 10 years since I started as a dealer a long time ago. I've got Bobby Ware here with me.
Yep, I'm Bobby Ware. I work in tech support and help people keep their machines humming along nicely. And I've been with Gamble about 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we really enjoy doing this webinar and grilling you guys on what you learned and what your experience has been with becoming a successful long arm quilter. So let me Andy, I'm gonna put you second or last, or you'll be the first second. And we'll take Dwayne and Jan first. They are a couple, although they are not in the same place at the same time. So that's why they're on separate screens. And before we got started, I made sure to insist with Jan that if Dwayne says anything incorrect, that she'll correct him. And she graciously agreed to do that.
She's holding him accountable.
Yeah. So I'm just going to start out with my first question, which is, where is home for you?
So we are currently living in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Just recently moved into an old farmhouse while we're building our new house.
That would be your dream house, correct?
Yes.
Very nice. And how long have you guys been doing long arm quilting?
We started in 2015, Christmas of 2015, and started our own little long arm business. When we started it specifically as a business, and just kind of worked our way up from there.
Why did you decide to start a long arm business? I mean, you could have started a different kind of business.
Almost solely on the fact that I watched Jan and my mother waiting 6 months to get a quilt quilted, and there appeared to be a need or an opportunity there for the first thing. And since I'm married to a quilter, I was always at quilt shows, and I would look at the quilts for a while, and then I'd be over messing with the long arm machines, and I was always just fascinated by the long arm machines.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first got into the business, you kind of saw an opening or a need, and you just jumped right in.
Yes, I personally found myself unemployed. I worked for Boeing for 36 years, and they offered us a package to retire. So I accepted that package, and then I personally needed something to do. And I thought this was a great little business that her and I could do together. Mm-hmm. And anytime Jan wants to jump in and elaborate on that.
all true so far.
Mhm.
So your significant other had a lot to do with the fact that you didn't go into something like carpentry or something other than quilting.
Yeah, well, I thought it would be a neat little business that her and I could do together, and I was never intimidated by a machine. In fact, I was fascinated by this machine and saw you could just see all the opportunity there. You could see the potential in the machine, not knowing anything other than what I just seen it shows. And I thought this is awesome machine.
So which model did you start with then?
So we bought a Statler, a 30-inch Statler right off the bat, to build a business around.
Mhm.
And we looked at all the machines and I said, this is the one. And my significant other says, well, we need to look at all of them. So we looked at all of them and we decided this is the one.
So Jan, did you have any hesitation about the choice of the Gamma? I'm guessing it was the most expensive machine you looked at of all the different ones.
Yes, but it really wasn't a hard decision because the other machines at that time, plastic, lightweight, didn't look like they would be substantial for a lifetime. So, and Dwayne was dead set on getting this machine. It just the quality that's in the workmanship was a selling point.
Mhm. Do you have the same machine today, or have you traded up or added an upgrade to it or anything like that?
We have the same machine. We added the Ascend to it, which is wonderful. It is can do the edge to edge faster and even more precise if that's possible.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, how did you know there was enough long arm business available in your town to support another long arm quilter? Dwayne already kind of alluded to that. Was there any doubt in your mind, Jan?
It initially at first, I thought, well, gosh, she needs her quilt quilted. And we put a couple of ads in the local paper. We took some nicely quilted custom quilts to our quilt guild, and people just showed up. So we had no
So did you,
problem recruiting customers.
so you found it was the recruiting of new customers was pretty easy for you, or I mean, did you have to
Yes.
put out a lot of advertisement? Tell us a little bit
Um,
about that. Did you already know where to go, or
So
tell us?
where we lived in New Melly, Missouri, they have a little local paper, and we put an ad in that, and we made a Facebook page and a website. And like I said, we were already in a quilt guild, and we joined another one. And because we weren't real busy initially, we had done some custom quilting, which, when you bring a beautifully quilted quilt in, you get lots of customers. And eventually we had to stop advertising because I could not keep up with all the people, and I had a backlog. And we
Well,
don't
that's a
advertise.
good problem to have. You had to stop
Yes,
advertising.
yes, but we try to get them in and get them out. But especially with custom quilts, they take a long time. So the edge to edge is where your money is at.
Mhm. Um, about how many hours per week do you spend quilting for other people these days?
So I don't quilt like a 9 to 5 job. Depends on what I'm doing. I might quilt an hour or two or do some prep work. I might quilt for 10 or 12 hours. Um, Weekly, it just varies. Right now, it's kind of weird because uh, we're living in a rental, and I just stopped taking quilts because of that. We were moving and we ended up setting up the machine, but there's other stuff going on. So this is not typical.
Mm.
So you have a little bit of freedom in your time and everything with that.
Well, you can always be the lady that says, sorry, it's going to be 6 months, and if they want to leave it with you, they leave it with you,
Yeah. But, and I don't know how about others feel about this, but I don't want a bunch of quilts in my house just sitting here waiting. So that's a stress, but
I'm laughing with you, Jan, not at you.
You can
it's hot in
relate to
here.
some of this.
We
Yeah.
don't have air conditioning in this little rental, so my glasses are like fogging up.
So when you got your machine, how did you come up with the funds to buy it? I mean, was that because Dwayne got a severance from his job, or did you have to borrow money?
We took it out of our retirement savings. We talked about financing and, but that's just ended up how we did it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then you didn't have to keep track of like how long it took to pay off the machine or anything like that. So, because it was all.
It would have been, it would have been, because we talked about like paying ourselves back or reinvesting it in something, but it would have taken about 18 or 19 months
Mm-hmm.
quilting full time, one of us quilting full time.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a question I have is, since we're talking to a lot of our target audience is people that are either starting a quilting business of their own or are looking at the possibility of doing that. You mentioned edge to edge. Do you do all edge to edge? Do you do some, custom quilting? What about that?
My majority is edge to edge. I do take custom quilts. Not as much as people are always looking for custom quilters. But I would do like one a month. And I tell people I've already got 3 custom quilts, so I'm busy until the end of the year, because as you may not know, or you may know, but it takes more time than an edge to edge. And while you're quilting that custom quilt, you can't do an edge to edge with one machine, and you have to charge enough to compensate for that. And I don't feel like you can hardly compensate for that. We
Mhm.
charge by square inch. I know some people do hourly, and or we'll just give a quota price and do it for that.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I have seen some people do is if they have 2 machines, they'll run edge to edges on one and do custom on the other. And that seems to be a nice compromise for those that have the space and the desire to have 2 machines. About what would you say is your total charge for an average queen size quilt? I know different parts of the country, some people are going to be shocked at how little you charge. Other people will be shocked at how much you charge. But what would you say?
Well, we were charging 2 cents a square inch for a pattern. Plus we charge batting if they don't bring their own. And we charge thread $1 a square yard. And we also charge what we were calling a setup fee, which is pressing the back, making it square, loading it, the needle. And I would say a queen size quilt with a pattern, including batting and thread, probably be about $260.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And about how many quilts would you say? How many quilts would you say you do in a year? And like, if you could think of over these past few years that you've been doing this, what has been like your worst year, the worst amount that you've done? And just tell us about that amount of quilts and revenue with
Well,
that.
I'm sorry, the first year, definitely we were just getting started. We did a lot of charity quilts and my quilts. So definitely didn't make any money the first year. And then this last year with moving, it's made a big dent. But in general, maybe 150 quilts a year. And most of the quilts are either not crib, but
Like
throw
lap size?
size, throw size, yes, or queen size. I think we've done a few king size and one cow queen king, and some crib quilts here and there. But a lot of people are comfortable doing crib quilts on their own machine. But queen is probably the dominant quilt size.
Mm-hmm.
And just and your perception of time, like over the year when you look back and see that you've produced this many quilts, do you feel like you have like just been plugging away and working, investing lots of time, or how does it feel time wise? Like sucking up a lot of your life, or tell us what what your feeling is on that.
Well, initially I was still working, so I didn't retire until January of 2020, like 10 seconds before the COVID shutdown
Yeah.
started. So, when you're trying to squeeze in something after work or on weekends, with your regular job. But after I retired, because Dwayne had started working at Gamble, then I have all this free time, it feels like. So a lot more time to quilt. And like I said, you can get up in the morning and quilt for a while. You can quilt, after dinner. You can quilt till midnight. So you can just make your schedule your own.
Do you have other services that you offer, like binding or piecing a backing or making a t-shirt quilt, or have you dipped a toe in any of those different services?
The only thing of that I haven't done is making t-shirt quilts. Of course, we quilt them, and I definitely have pieced backings. We do bind. We've even hand bound a couple of quilts just because it called for it. But we do charge for that, of course. I press quilts, I press backs, whatever it takes to make the quilt look nice.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer a back, when I put the back on, for it to be pressed and square. So I will do that. It really doesn't take me very much time to do that. And I feel like I have a better result.
Well, yeah, it's better than fighting it the whole way through.
We've done vintage quilts, where we've taken in vintage quilt tops and washed them and quilted them, very gently, because like, even though they probably should have been hand quilted, we're like, if we don't quilt this quilt, it'll never be a quilt. It'll always just be a quilt top, and very gently quilted those. So that's interesting aspect as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, talking since we are talking to potential and actual quilters, business building quilters, what would you say, if you could pick out what would be some of the hardest parts of producing and growing a business like you're doing?
For me, it's valuing yourself. Initially I was like, oh, nobody's going to want to pay that much or whatever. And now it's like, for custom quilts, we started off like 3.5 cents, and we just kept bumping it up. If you don't value your time, nobody else is either. And I quoted somebody a custom quilt the other day, and she didn't even blink an eye. And inside I'm going, oh my gosh, So you're providing a service and people want it and you're good at it. So don't underestimate yourself.
Preach, sister, preach.
I think it's important to point out too that you didn't overvalue your time at the beginning, you undervalued it, but you also learned a lot about yourself and about quilting. And at the point that you are today, you've earned that paycheck because you're a journeyman quilter, right? You've put in the hours at the machine to learn how this job should be done. And so perhaps as a beginner, you might not have justifiably commanded the price that you can command today. I'm just saying there that
I agree.
experience does count for something. Yeah.
Experience is a teacher for sure. And we've made all the mistakes you can make, and won't make them again.
I've made so many mistakes and learned from them. I'm thinking about making a few more.
Mistakes are they're actually valuable because they are one of life's greatest teachers. As she was saying that, I was wondering, and maybe everybody on this program, do you think there's a balance between when you first start out? She talked about valuing her time versus overkill with the pricing. I don't know. What do you guys think?
When
Well,
we
think you
first started
undercharged to
out, I
start out
think
with? Go ahead.
when we
Okay.
first started out, I think that we like I didn't want the business to fail. So I worked a lot of hours, and while the quilt was quilting, I was exploring Creative Studio and seeing the features like circular array and the things that you could do in there. And just we just tried to make it as good as we could make it.
Put the customer in the quilt first, figuring that if you take care of the customers, they'll come back. That's what you were doing.
Yeah, there was, and it was, we spent a lot of time before we ever took any paying customers in the beginning because you don't get a second chance at a first impression. So when we started and we put ourselves out there, we wanted it to be good quality work. And then from there you could build your business.
Mhm. What is one change in technology that makes it easier today than it was when you started?
Jan?
I'm thinking, I mean, I had already said that the Ascend is helpful. You can quilt a lot faster, and it's very precise. You don't give that up for quilting faster. And just more experience and being comfortable. We've done a lot of creative studio education, going to workshops and retreats and cruises. So I'm more comfortable using the software. And if there is an issue, I know how to work around it or do something, to control it.
If
We
somebody
also
feels
started off in CS6 and then jumped to CS7. So that was a huge impact.
yeah, and speaking of that, jumping from CS6 to CS7, do you feel like the education that you availed yourself of, has that been a big advantage to you? And do you think that would be an advantage to other people who are learning how to use this software?
Well, I will say that I was used a computer at work and thought I was proficient, but I was completely lost and just it was not insurmountable. That you just learn and learn and learn, and somebody who's more familiar with computers or CAD probably wouldn't be, have as much of an issue, but I learned how to do it. I think I'm pretty good at it. And if I can do it, anybody can.
So, who was your biggest cheerleader or your support system when you were building this business? Was it each other, or did you have kids or parents or other people that were in your life?
Yes, all of the above. Now that we've moved closer to my mother-in-law, she she definitely is. So everybody knows, that I'm a quilter, and she's great. But everybody has been supportive. My guild, just people will have their quilts quilted just to see what we're like and want to support us.
So what would you say is one thing that you wish somebody had told you when you first started out on this journey?
Value yourself. I think I alluded to that earlier, Dwayne.
There's going to be some quilts with some wavy borders.
Sounds like the voice of
Oh,
experience.
Some
yeah,
quilt.
yeah.
Deal with it.
I've learned all kinds of little tricks for that, and even to take a tuck in the border that you can't even see, because that was the only way that it was gonna work. So without taking the border off,
Yeah.
which we've done.
I didn't used to know what
Me
piano
too.
keys were when I first started. Now I see wavy borders and I'm just like, piano keys would look great there.
Yes.
w- what kind of impact has the quilting money and the control over your personal schedule made in your life?
Well, for me, it's great. I am a retired nurse practitioner, and I work uh, 8 to 5, for 40 years. And it's great not having to get up at a certain time, like, 6 in the morning. Before that, I worked as a nurse, and I worked all the holidays and weekends, and it's great not having to do that. I can plan my day. Um, and the money is not as much as I was making, but there's a trade-off, but I enjoy it a lot more. I sleep better.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Dwayne?
That in the beginning, it was nice not to have to go to work or go to a set job, but I spent a lot of time in the beginning, just getting the business started and trying to quilt proficiently.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to switch gears here and look at the questions that have come in. So this one's a great one from Corey, asking Jan, how much is your setup fee?
Oh, $4. And no one has
$4.
ever blinked an eye at that. And I tell them, that's to make the backing is never square. And that's to square up the backing and press it. And every quilt gets a new needle, and that helps pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
And no one's ever questioned it.
Mm-hmm. I have a question from Cynthia asking, how many quilts do you have in the queue at a time?
Right now, because we are in the process of moving, I have, let's see, 3 customs and 2 on the way. But at one point I had 30 quilts in the queue, and that's when I stopped taking quilts, because eventually I would get to them, but just that hanging over your head. And I had a whiteboard in the basement. I would write everybody's quilt down, so I knew who was next. And coming down the basement steps and looking at that every day was stressful. So I don't try to take more than like 20 backup at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And As
Yeah,
you say,
20 is a
people say
lot.
they're gonna, yeah, well, people say they're gonna bring a quilt and then they bring four. So that's happens a lot. Or you quilt one and they want to see how you do, and then they'll come back with a bunch. So if you
Mhm.
pass the test, so
Mhm. Are there any specific online tutorials or GAML instructors on custom quilting in CS7 that you recommend?
well,
I don't.
I'm sorry, always the GAML videos. And I have gone to workshops, and I went to Quilting with Confidence, the initial run, and then I've gone to one. If I went to one this year, I went on the cruise. Anywhere I can take a class, I always learn something. And you think, oh, I'm pretty good at this. Never something you can't learn or learn to do a different way.
Mhm.
And I agree with that. If I could say, I talk to a lot of quilters every day, and one of the main issues tends to be that they just need more education. They need to have a better grasp on what they're doing. I know that some of those courses that we have available in
On the website.
yeah, gameleducation.com, those are invaluable, especially the ones, what are they called, for beginners? And that's, if for somebody that's just getting into it, that's a very valuable asset to avail yourself of.
Mhm. So the last question that we have before we switch gears and start grilling Andy, he's had it pretty easy here, is that so all those years ago that you first got your GAML and started on this journey, what advice would you give to someone who who sees herself or himself in your story and wants to, maybe try to do something similar? What would you advise them?
If you want to do it, and it will work. You have to put the work in, but a lot, it's quilting, so it's fun. Do it.
And do you believe it's still possible for somebody to do what you did?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I believe that there's way more quilts out there to quilt than there are good quilters. And I always
Amen.
believe that. And like in our area, there's several long arm quilters, and I never even think about competition so much, because there's just enough out there that it really makes very little difference.
Well, think of all these quilt tops that are living in bags right now. I mean, that haven't been quilted. There's more of them in bags than there are ones that have ever been finished. They're just sitting there. It's sad. Lonely quilt tops.
Sounds like a charity.
Yeah. Sounds like a good way to scam some free quilt tops from people. All right. So Dwayne and Jan, stay on with us, because some of these questions that might come in would appeal to you guys. But let's switch gears, talk to Andy. Andy, what part of the country are you in? What do you call home?
I live in Morris County, New Jersey, which is we're about an hour from New York, 2 hours from Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm. Is it a rural area?
And there's no part of New Jersey that's really super rural in the way. I'm from the Midwest, where I think of that as being very rural. It is rural for New Jersey, where I live, but it's not as rural as other parts of the country. It's certainly very pretty horse country here, mountainy, lots of quilters.
That term rural is a very relative term.
Yeah.
And well, Dr. Andy, how long have you been doing long arm quilting?
Sure. I started in 2018. I was a my PhD is in theater education. And so I'd been teaching at universities and at schools, and I got sick. Actually, I had a gallbladder issue, and I was working on, I was in the hospital, and I was bummed out because I didn't have time that summer to quilt. And my husband said, "Why are you going back to school in the fall? Why don't you stay home and quilt?" And I had never thought about, like, why am I going back to school in the fall? And so we had saved some money for to renovate part of our house, and instead I bought a Gamel in 2018, and that's how I started.
So he must have known you wanted the machine. I mean, had you been looking at him for a while, or how did this happen?
I'd been looking at him for a long time. I don't do anything by half measures usually. And so I had started looking at machines at first to quilt my own quilts. I had some quilts and shows, and my mom's a quilter, so she didn't like quilting. So I was quilting hers, just free motion at a domestic machine. And I did a couple quilts and people really liked them. And so I started doing some of their quilts at my sit down domestic machine and realized that this was silly. I should invest in a long arm, if for nothing else, just to do my own quilts and some of my friends' quilts. And maybe someday when I retired from the university, I would start long arming, maybe as a retirement plan. But then the pandemic happened.
Right.
So, and I decided that I loved quilting. I really loved quilting. And I was just as artistically and satisfied as I was quilting as I was directing plays. And so I changed gears, made a left turn, and started quilting for other people.
So was the Gamel machine the first machine that you ever got, or did you start with another one and then?
Nope. I met Lori Clayton at a show 100 years ago, and I had tried all the machines, a lot like Jan did, and they all felt like toys to me. They didn't. I mean, I'm a big guy, and I just thought I would break something else if everything felt too slow and too silly. And I went over and I talked to Lori, and she was very, very kind. And at that point, it was still a few years away from making the purchase. And every time I went back to the show, I'd stop in and see Lori and say, "This is the machine." So when it was finally time to buy one, I knew exactly what I wanted. And I called Lori and placed an order that day.
And did you start with a computerized or a hand guided?
Yeah, I started with the 30-inch Statler. I knew always that if I was going to quilt for other people, even in a small way, that I wanted that edge-to-edge capability. I have a friend who has a shop here in New Jersey, and she has a machine that doesn't have robotics of any kind. She does pantographs and stuff, which is fine, but it was not, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like it.
It's hard work.
Yeah, and it didn't speak to me at all. And I'm also a tech guy. I like gadgets and tech, and so I found that my ideas for quilting, I could bring them to life more with the Statler than I could without it. So I knew that from the get-go, I had to have the robotics, and I'm glad that I did, because it took me a while to learn them and learn them well.
Well, and those of us here on this call, I mean, for the audience, you may not know this, but with the things that you can do in the Creative Studio software, if you have an artistic bent, it's incredibly satisfying. If you don't have an artistic bent, that's fine. There's lots of beautiful pattern designers, and you can buy their patterns, and it'll look gorgeous. But especially if you're at all creative, there's nothing you can't do. If you can imagine it, you can quilt it.
So Andy, when you first started, how did you find customers, and how did you start building your customer base? How did that work?
I was moonlighting at a quilt shop, teaching piecers and that kind of thing. Your sort of standard quilt shop classes. half square triangle night and that kind of thing. And I had a lot of regulars that were coming back for my teaching. And that was really great. And so some of those ladies, I knew I could I could quilt some of their quilts. I hadn't been real active in the guilds, but I'd gone to some. There's a lot of guilds in North Jersey. There's probably 5 or 6 regular guilds that meet here within just 15 or 20 minutes of where I live. So I popped into those, and I did like Jan, I started a Facebook page and a website. And within about 2 weeks, I had more quilts than I knew what to do with. I was really overwhelmed. And I went downstairs, and that's where my studio's in the basement. And like, I guess a lot of us have our studios in the basement. And my husband came down after a couple weeks of these long days and late nights and said, "What are you doing? Like, why are you've become a factory worker? You know, this isn't why you got into this." And so I took the website. He was right. I took the website down, and it was right about then that the pandemic happened. And that gave me kind of a reprise. I had some customers, some good customers, but I also had some time to get better at my craft, to really focus on it. And I still used customer quilts, but I didn't turn them over real fast. They took a lot longer for me to get good at. I did some of my own quilts. I did quilts for my family. And that gave me some time to develop into really knowing CS, and like Andrew said, I could learn how to do all the creative fun stuff. It wasn't just edge to edge. And when I did have edge to edge, I knew how to manipulate it so that it could do it better, so it could do it in my way, and all that kind of stuff. So having that time to really learn was invaluable and made me a lot more confident. And so by the time that was over, people had seen my quilts, and word of mouth, one person to the next person to the next person, and I was busy again. But this time, I could charge more, and I could also take my time. People knew that if they were going to come to me, it was going to take a little longer, but they were going to get something special back, and they were willing to do that. I think there's a lot of long armors in my area who will do a fine job and do a basic pantograph of, you pick one of 10, quick and fast and done. But I think the people coming to me want something more. And I decided, and where I live, I'm very lucky that people are willing to pay for it. And so that's how I've sort of made my shop a little bit different in that way. I offer some different things that other folks don't do. And it's helped me to build a really loyal and wonderful clientele.
Mm-hmm. How did you know there was enough long arm business available in your area to support another long arm quilter?
A lot of my students were coming to me with problems, like they'd have their quilt long armed somewhere, and the tension would be all off for like half the quilt, or the pantograph wouldn't line up, or there'd be lots of tucks or something. And so I spent a lot of time with my own students ripping out other long armors' work. And so I knew that was, at least for them, there were people who were looking. And I think I don't think that was all the long armor's fault. I just think there's a lot of demand in this part of the country, and there weren't enough people doing the work well. So not to say that there wasn't people doing good work. There are. It's just right. There seemed to be a few holes. And at the same time, a lot of quilt shops, like everywhere in the country, were shuttering, closing up. And so a lot of those quilt shops offered long arming services. So when they closed, there was more need in the area. So I saw that. And I guess, I don't know, I just knew that if I did my best work all the time, And if I was proud of it and I did my best work, then people would come back for it.
Mhm.
And so far that's been true. Really put the quilt first, the customer first. I always tell new quilters that it's like only part about the quilting. That's like half of it. The other part is really building relationships with quilters.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that I really enjoy and I'm good at. And so that's helped me to build a really beautiful network of people.
Mhm. The quilters are by and large a very, very fine group of people.
Oh yeah.
Yep, that you like to have in your life.
Well, and they value quality, they value precision, they value things that as long armors we can do well and be rewarded for. And
Mhm.
so I think that's when you asked me about if I saw the hole in the market, that's what I saw, that people weren't taking advantage of that, like really treating these quilts as something really special, and then making the quilter feel really special. That's really worked for me.
Mhm. Um, so normally I would ask, how did you come up with the funds to purchase your machine? You explained that you had it saved up.
Yeah.
Did you ever do any calculations on how long it took to pay back your machine or anything like that?
Yeah, when I started doing it, when we did the website, so not right away, about 6 months in. After that, it took about a year and a half, something about that, before I say she doesn't owe me any money now. It was a good year and a half, and I have to say, in that year and a half, I did a lot of edge to edge, a lot more than I still do a lot of edge to edge, but I did a lot more of it. Then I was not doing very much custom work for other people as I am now.
What would you say is your ratio now, edge to edge versus custom?
It's tricky because where I live, there's very few quilters who will even talk about custom, let alone take them on. And so in some ways, I'm very lucky that I live in a place where people can afford it and where people want it. So that's it's been growing. And I'd say I do one custom to 10 or 15 edge to edge. That's about what it is now. And it seems to be growing in the custom direction. A lot of my edge to edge customers will do 2 or 3 edge to edge and then sort of save up for a special quilt and then do a couple more edge to edge and then a custom quilt. And I've noticed after they do one, they want that second one comes a lot faster. They really like special that special touch when you can do custom. And the Gamel has made that. And since I bought the Ascend last year, and that has helped me to turn that around faster. That's why I can take more custom work, is because the Ascend, I can turn that
You've
speed
noticed a
up.
significant difference with the.
Oh, huge. I used to be able to have to do, if I would do all of my I would do a custom piece and then all the edge to edge that had backed up, and then a custom piece, then all the edge to edge that had backed up. And now that time between the two is much faster. I can really get back to the edge to edge a lot faster than before. The edge to edge goes faster, but the custom, and I expected that, but I didn't expect how much faster it makes my custom go.
Mhm.
And that's just the precision. If I tell it to stitch here, it stitches there. It's pretty amazing. I rolled a quilt yesterday. I did a custom block. I had to unpick some of it, and then I went and did something else, and I advanced it, and back and forth and back and forth. And I have to go back and do that thing again. And I got it lined up, and it stitched in the exact same holes that it did the first time 4 hours ago. Which, that's, to me, still, I know it's math and computers, but it's before the stat layer. It would have been, or before the Ascend, it would have been close, but not to the whole close exact. And that's, I think that's pretty cool.
Mhm. It's magic.
It really is. Yeah.
So about how many hours a week do you spend doing quilts for other people these days?
I do 3 studio days a week, and then I do 2 days a week that I teach either in my home studio and people come to learn, or I go to other places and do clubs and stuff. I lump that in because most of my customers are coming, especially my repeat customers, are coming from my classes and clubs. So I see it all as one thing, but it's not like I'm standing behind the long arm 40 hours a week. It's broken up nicely that way. So I'd say about 3 8-hour days. And sometimes I, have a project I'm really excited on and work till midnight, or I'll wake up in the middle of the night and can't sleep and go downstairs and mess around for a while. But I shoot for 3 days a week.
And that description that you just gave of your quilting is kind of tied in with other things in your life, and you talked about how quilting is not just quilting, but it's also involves relationships with others, and that you just said feeds right into that.
I think we were talking about before this started. I was at a show a few weeks ago, and I overheard somebody interested in long arming, and she wanted to quilt while her kids were asleep and while her kids were at school, and that's it. And she's sort of an extrovert, so working in her base, or an introvert, so not talking to people was really good for her in her basement. And I took her aside and said, that's okay, but you still have to talk to people, and you've got to look at, the quilt that you quilted 6 months ago just got gifted, yesterday. And you've got to look at the pictures, and it's so much easier if you're actually interested than if you're faking it. And that kind of relationship that you build up with people takes time, it takes energy, takes time away from quilting. And so I think it's really important to building a business that's going to last, that isn't just, drop off and pick up.
I'm a very much a people person too, and probably far too touchy feely in the sense of making the connections with people and really valuing those. But I have met the people, and maybe on some of the earlier podcasts or the recordings of these, when you go back and listen to them, there are people who, they do a drop off pickup, or they build their business around getting the quilt top through the mail. And I think it's kind of interesting how each and every person ends up building a business that's kind of reflective of themselves and their personality, utilizing whatever gifts that you have that maybe other people don't have exactly the same gifts. That's cool.
For better or worse, there are lots of mail order quilt companies out there right now.
Yep.
And the way I think about it is, I don't want to charge, less than 2 cents for my time. I don't want to do that. And if it means having a cup of coffee with a nice person and making a friend, and then getting to do really nice work that I'm invested in, and at the same time they're excited about, and they're going to tell their friends and tell their guild friends and all of that, then I don't have to, like Dwayne was saying, we're not really in competition with those people. We're offering something so different. And so I think, like I say, I think there's room for everybody. But I think that world is a lot trickier to break into than the one that I work in.
I just took a peek at the question box here, and I see a couple. Debbie was asking if your customers are mostly local or if you have a lot of mail-ins, and it sounds like local is your niche.
I have mostly local, but I have people who found me. I did the Cherrywood challenge a couple times, and so I get every once in a while somebody will see one of my quilts at a show, and I'll get an email and make a new friend. I'm also pretty active on Facebook in a lot of the Guys Who Quilt group, or machine quilters group, and those things. And so I'll find people that way too, who aren't necessarily in my area. And I love my mother, and she's got a big mouth, and so I get a lot of people from my hometown too, which is fantastic, and I appreciate those ladies too. But it's about 90-10. 90% of my work is right here, and 10% is from elsewhere.
And what would you say your total charge is for an average queen size quilt, using the same kind of criteria that Jan gave us, where she's looking at maybe 240 for a edge to edge?
Like an 80 by 80, something like that. Yeah, I would say, well, it all depends, right? Because I every one of my pieces gets its own quote, and I do a square inch as a guess, and then I give a range. So between 250 and 300, I would say, and they're usually right at that 270 mark. I charge an all-in fee. I give a ballpark number based on square inches, and then I round down and round up, and then that's I sell one kind of batting, or people can go find their own batting. And I don't charge for thread, and I don't charge for needles. It's just all part of my services. I charge a lot for binding because I hate it, but I'll do it if people need it. And I've partnered with
For those listening on the podcast later, we're getting emphatic nodding from Dwayne and Jan. They also apparently hate binding. So
it's just hard when you've got a pile of quilts and you want to keep going to stop and bind one, and then it's a week later and I've got to put the binding on that quilt. I've got it down to where I can machine bind pretty quickly, but a lot of folks really want that hand binding, and it's just there's no speeding it up for me. I've got a couple local ladies who are retired quilt shop owners who will do it for me in a pinch, but it's binding is not my bread and butter. But I do a lot of extra services that people around here appreciate that I don't see very often in other places, so I can raise my price a little bit higher. All my quilts go home in a bag, like a muslin storage bag. They get labels. Not all of them get labels. My custom quilts all get labels. That's why I can make sure my name goes on it. I do a certificate of authenticity for all my quilts. My customers love that. It's like a small replacement evaluation and a certificate. They love
Like
that.
each quilt has its own birth certificate.
Yes, it does. My artist friends do it for their pieces. I've had a lady had a house fire. She was able to use that for her insurance. I had another guy, the quilt was used to move a grandfather clock in their move by accident, and it totally destroyed this wall quilt that they had in their house. And he was able to use that to get the insurance company to pay to replace the stuff so he could make it again. So it is a nice thing. It's also a nice thing when you're giving a quilt to somebody. It's hard to say, this took me a year to piece and cost me $500 in fabric and $600 in quilting. But if somebody else put it in the certificate of authenticity, then it's totally fine.
it might reduce the likelihood of becoming a cat bed.
Exactly. And so that's a nice thing. It's also nice when you're donating quilts to have something like that. Yeah. So I do all that. I do that for my quilts, and so my per inch price goes up, and it hangs out right about 04 and a half with all in.
So Jan mentioned that when she went from being a nurse practitioner to being a quilter, she was okay with a little bit of a pay cut, probably because of a lot of additional freedom. I'm guessing you don't earn the same as a quilter as probably when you were teaching, but how has your best year been and your worst year?
It was my husband is, I'm very lucky. He has an amazing job. And so he's also a physician and works for a big pharma company. And so he's been an incredible supporter of this project. And so I've been able to have the freedom to really let my business really reinvest back into the business, whether that's in studio stuff or machines or more thread or traveling for more technology or for classes or whatever. So that's been really great. And I didn't really see, like we weren't really using any of our the income for ourselves until about this year. Up until this point, it's all gone back into the business. really trying to make it something that we're proud of, and then something that, like Dwayne was talking about, something that can be sustained for a long time. Like we've really put the work in now to have a real good system that works really well, and that we're proud of, that hopefully will, keep growing. And it's been growing about 20% every year.
Mhm.
What is something that you wish that somebody had told you when you first started this journey?
It's okay to say no. It's okay. When I first started, a lady had some cabins, and all the rooms were done in fish themes. So there was a bass room and a trout room and all that. And she had these quilts made for the beds, all of them a different fish theme. And she's been calling around to find out. There was like 8 queen size quilts. So I was really excited. This was like my first big check. And when they came, they were panel quilts, and all the borders had been put on, wrong. They were small panels with border and border and border and border and border. And they were, trapezoidal and waving all over the place.
Oh man.
And I had quoted her, some ridiculously cheap price. And not only were they not fun to quilt, they weren't neat when they were done. And I spent so much time on them that I lost money that I could have been doing other things. And she wasn't a quilter. She wasn't somebody who I was going to have as a customer forever and ever and ever. And I should have said no. So I think learning that it's okay, and part of what Jan was saying, building on what Jan was saying, you've got to value your own time. And that's got to be worth something. Because if it's not worth something to you, nobody else cares. And it's okay to just say, no, I'm not the right fit for you. That's one to put in the mail to so-and-so, or, somebody else maybe would like to have a crack at this. So that's something I wish I would have known. I think I also wish I would have known that it's also okay to take your time on a quilt. It's okay with a custom quilt if you don't have the right idea for it, or it's not singing to you yet, that it's okay to say to somebody, look, I need some more time to figure this out, or instead of just hurrying to get it done. And so that's been, for me, the ability to slow down, let it sit there for a minute if it has to, is a okay thing. Giving yourself some grace that way.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple more questions from people. How do you handle people that bring in charity quilts and expect you to give them a discount or do it for free?
So remember my system, I do a custom, and then all the edge to edge, and then a custom, and then all the edge to edge. I will slip a charity quilt in there at the end of that cycle. If I'm not crazy busy or have a bunch of deadlines. So what I will say is this charity quilt might take me 3 years to get done.
How about Jann and Dwayne? Same question. How would you handle people that bring in charity quilts and want it discounted or free?
I do charity quilts for our guilds. If someone brings it in, I discount it. I don't do it for free. If I pick up a charity quilt at guild that needs to be quilted, I'll do it for free, but it's usually not even a throw size. So I definitely don't, like I said, don't do things for free.
No, me either. If somebody wants something done for a charity that I really believe in, then we'll do my basic batting and my basic. I'll get it as cheap as I can get it, but I still, I can't do it for free. It's not just that $200. It's the $200 plus the time taken away from another quilt, right? And so it become a very expensive donation. And when you explain that to folks, usually they're very reasonable and okay with it, especially if you're giving them, you know, sort of the cost price. And a lot of folks are willing to wait the 3 years. Then I use those when I'm teaching. I'll take it on the road with me and I'll work on it on the road, or I'll take it to a class and I'll work on it at a class. And that works out okay too.
This is a good question for both parties. We'll start with Andy. How long does it take you to do a queen size quilt?
Edge to edge?
I'm guessing, yeah.
Yeah, with the Ascend, with my with a simple, my sort of lowish, you know, the fast patterns. Loops and stars on a queen size quilt goes pretty quick. You know, but I would say the average couple 2-3 hours. I had a custom quilt on the frame for 3 weeks this month, and which was queen size. But it was a very special quilt and a really good customer. And I learned a lot doing it, and she paid for my time. So it all, you know, it all worked out. I have 40 quilts now waiting for me.
Yeah.
While I was doing that other one, but
yeah.
That's
so Jan, your estimate on time for a queen, because sometimes people don't own a machine yet. They don't know how long it takes.
Yeah, from start to finish, and by start, taking it out of the bag, ironing the backing, which I know a lot of people don't do, and loading it, taking a break for lunch. I can finish it in a day. Usually it'll be a day and a half. And that's because it's just not the only thing I'm doing. But yeah, it's amazing. So, and I will trim my quilts. I know some people don't do that, but I trim ready to bind unless they ask me not to.
I do the same thing. I think it looks much nicer when you give it back to them. And everybody appreciates it. In the back of the table, I have the cutting board on the back of my Gamel, and I'm so glad that they came back, because it's one of my favorite tools, is being able to just put some weights on it and cut it straight, which is a lot of folks, especially in the Northeast, where space is such a premium. You know, a lot of folks live in 200-300 square foot apartments. They don't have space to trim a quilt like that. So being able to do that for my customers is a very small thing that they really appreciate.
Yeah, there's people that don't know that, but we have a cutting mat that is, I don't know the total length. It's over 10 feet. It's
amazing.
Probably close to 12. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to be able to not have to butt the little mats up against each other, and yeah, that it's one mat.
I have ladies who bring me their borders, and then I will cut them, and then I just use my channel locks to put them on, and that stitches in the ditch at the same time as you put them on. So they're not wavy, they're cut straight. And because they hate putting on borders, I can sometimes charge for that service almost as much as I charge for the quilting. So there's ways to upsell this in a way that, like I say, quilters are happy to pay for, especially if they don't have a king size place to cut a straight border. And this is a great way. It saves me time, it saves them time. And channel locks are an easy way to put borders on. So I do that all the time.
All right. Well, we've run a little longer than we planned. We've done this before where we run a little bit long. I wish we had another hour because the conversation, I think, is going to be very, very enlightening to not only the people who are here tonight, but people who hear it later. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. It is our goal here at Gamel. Our mission is to help quilters to bring beauty and love and warmth into the world, and to support you while you do that. And I think it's really helpful to people to maybe kind of see you guys as a little bit of a trailblazer. Wait, if he did it, I can do it.
Yeah, and this has been a great crew of people to interview this week. We really appreciate you guys' time with us, and we really appreciate you opening yourselves for the people, and to just kind of give them some inspiration. So thank you very much.
Thank you for
You're
having me.
most welcome. Thank you for having us.
Mhm. All right. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
See you guys.